Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Aaron and I am the Weekend Modder, and today we are going to RGH modify this console, which is a 4 GB NAND Corona Xbox 360, using an Ace V3, which runs about $6 or $7, and the SD tool, which runs about $10. So all in, shipping included, we're going to hit about 19 bucks to get this thing modded. So hang on with me and we'll go through that. Alright guys, guys, that was weird. So first thing I want to clarify, the $19 price, that's the do-it-yourself and you already own basic soldering tools. So what I'm including in that price here is the Ace V3 and the SD card. The cool thing about the Ace V3 is that it comes preloaded with timing files necessary for this console. The SD card, or SD tool, is the only thing that you need in order to read and write the NAND here. So, hi everybody. Wow, holy crap, up to 17 people already. People got some free time on Saturdays, huh? So one of the first things that I want to show you here is how I identified this console as a 4 GB NAND. So, as you can see, obviously I've already removed the case from it. And the couple of key points that you look at when you're looking at a Corona console is the location of the NAND and its orientation and how it sits. And then one of the other features that you want to look for is the presence of a couple of little resistors up here, which gives you a really good indicator of whether or not you're going to need a post-fix adapter. So to point this out here, when looking at a Corona console, so this image is specific to Coronas, if you can see on the left-hand side, the 4 GB NANDs there, that the little chip in the center does not reach either set of pin pads. Whereas on the right hand side, the 16 MB NAND consoles, you can see the chip extends all the way out to the row of pads. So that's a really easy way that you can tell whether or not you've got a 4 gig or a 16 MB NAND. And as you can see here, this plainly matches the one that was in the upper left hand, so it's a 4 GB NAND. The other area that I mentioned before that you want to check out is the little R2, C6, and 7 resistors here. So you can see R2, C6 printed there, R2, C7 printed here. So these resistors, oftentimes in later model Coronas, the later model Coronas will actually have these resistors missing. So there'll be two tiny little pads with nothing over the top of them like you see here. When these resistors are missing, it's a really good indicator that you're also going to need to install what's called a post-fix adapter, which requires removing the heatsink. In this case, we saw that those resistors are present. They're actually 0 ohm resistors, so they're really just bridges. And when they're present, that's a really solid indicator that we're not going to need a post-fix adapter, but can rather use the standard C point on the other side of the motherboard. Just to show you additionally, if you're used to the team executor diagram stuff, what you'll see here is the team executor identification guide, and it talks about the same thing. Step 1, check the NAND location. Step 2, check the existence of those bridges. And step 3, you can actually visually identify with the heatsink removed whether or not you're going to need a post-fix adapter. So you can check that out all over here. So this will be our diagram for when we install the SD tool here. So we'll keep on going here. So first step I'm going to do is just reposition my camera out a little bit and get in shape so we can go ahead and start the installation process. So what I'm using right now is called a fiberglass scratch pin. There's a really thin layer of a coating on top of these points here that if you don't use the scratch pin, it becomes difficult to solder through. Hey guys, I'm seeing lots of questions scroll through in the timing. I've got a little bit of limited time this morning, so I'm not going to be able to sidetrack and answer completely unrelated questions too much. So if people in the chat want to answer other folks that are popping out there, that would be awesome. I'll see if I can try to keep track and correct as much as I can. Murky Conduct, I see you asked how much is the unbrick service. You can check that out over at store.weekendmodder.com. There's an unbrick heading right up at the top. And it's basically $45 for the basic, or I think it's $75 or $85 if you want to buy a programmer so that you never have to do an unbrick service again. So what I just did there while I was speaking was I applied some flux paste over that top row of the header here, and then I'm also going to apply some flux over the 4 gig points that we're going to solder to, as well as to the little ground or crystal area there. So when I do this, I like to have the console oriented this way in front of me because that matches up exactly with the install diagram. So in this orientation, I'm looking at it the same way, kind of sideways, as I am in this orientation on the console. So, get my camera in here. So there's our pad, and then here is again our install diagram. So that labels that with the same numbering that is present on the SD tool. So across the bottom of the SD tool, there are numbers, if I can get the camera to focus here, labeling each of the points, and those correspond to the labeling you saw in that image, which is available also over on the website where I sell them, over at store.weekendmodder.com. Modshop, what's up, bro? Thanks for joining. So here we go. We're going to get started by kind of pre-tinning the pad here, which is going to be helpful to allow everything to stick. So we'll go ahead and hit those spots per the diagram that we know we're going to need to connect to. So I'm skipping some again. If you reference that image, you can find it over at the website, or you can just screen cap it out of the YouTube video, whatever works for you, because some of these points are totally unused, and it just makes sense to do that. So I've got several of those points tinned with a little bit of extra solder on them. I want to show you guys the reference image again, so you can see that 15 here is unused, and then these whole 3 are unused. So I've got the first 2, then I need to skip 3 and do 2 more. So that's kind of how my brain works through it, is just kind of counting the pads and stuff. They are numbered, obviously, and that numbering corresponds to the images that you've seen referenced. Additionally, this little side of the crystal here that's used for the ground, or basically the indicator of whether you're reading and writing from the NAND, or reading and writing, or allowing the console to have access to the NAND. I just put a little bit of a solder ball on there so that when we install our little quick disconnect, we've got that available to us to connect and disconnect easily. Trey, yes, as I told you, it shipped out yesterday, the day after you ordered it, the very morning. So it's already shipped, and mailman's already picked it up. It's on its way to you, man. All right, so continuing on with the wiring of the NAND here, we're going to do the upper left point, which is going to be number 2. So I'm going to look on the SD tool here, and I see number 2 is this wire. So it's just as simple as isolating that one, and we're going to install that to that pad. So it should be a real gentle, basically melt the solder that you already have on the pad and slide in your pre-tinned wire in, and then it all just connects up nice and easy. You want to be real careful to take it gentle not pull any of the pads off, and especially be careful of bridging. It's pretty easy to do. These pads are pretty close together. It's not the most difficult soldering in the world, but it certainly is something that you want to try to avoid bridging all over the place there. So what I'm going to do is kind of pull some of these wires up and away to kind of get them out of my way. And then I'm going to grab the next one in series, which is actually going to be labeled G for ground here. Man, sorry for the camera bump there. Having a hard time isolating it. Is there any difference between the V1 and V2 postfix adapter? No, not really. The V2 just includes additional pads that are there for wire length adjusting, basically tuning. So that's functionally the only difference. Any case that you would use a V1 for, you could use a V2, and vice versa. Yes, I will absolutely take cash on unbrick service. That's not a problem at all. All right, so we've got we've got 2 in ground. So the next pad we're going to do, I do this whole bottom row first. So if we go here, the next one I'm actually going to hit is going to be 14 and 16, these two. So complete this whole, what I consider the bottom row, and then move on to the other row. So we'll isolate 14, bring it around, and then get that installed. So there's 14, and then 16. And this SD tool, you might notice, is sorry, I can't solder and talk at the same time, is different than the one that's for sale on my website, only in color. It's the same identical product. This is just one that I got as a kind of a beta test from Mod Shop back when he was, I think, first developing them or whatever. So this is a Corona 6 or 4 gigabyte model that we're doing with a Ace V3 and the SD tool. So now moving on to the top row, I'll go back to the reference image again for everybody. The next ones we'll be doing are 1 and 3 here. This is a regular S model slim. This is not an E series. The E series would be likely to not have the resistors that I pointed out earlier in the video, R2, C6, and 7. They would almost always, and in fact it may be always, require a postfix adapter if you have a 4 gig E series. It's very likely that they would be in need of a postfix adapter, I guess. So there's 1 and 3, and then again back to the reference image just to point out for everybody, the next and final 2 we're going to connect are 11 and 13. So we're going to go 11. And then finally 13. All right. So now that we've got the SD tool installed, one of the things I suggest doing at this point before you actually connect up your SD card reader writer and try to read the NAND would be to simply verify that you haven't bridged anything or caused the console to stop booting. And a couple of things that you'll want to do there. So first of all, you're going to want to raise the SD tool off of the motherboard so that the contacts that are exposed in the back don't inadvertently bridge across something here. And then you're also going to want to ensure that your ground line, or the line that ran from the point labeled C over here to the crystal that we soldered the quick disconnect on, that is not connected, because we want the console to be able to boot right now. So I'm actually just going to, I'm going to bend and break that wire right off, not intentionally, but we'll reconnect that in a second, because having it disconnected is absolutely what we want right now. So we're going to go ahead and plug in HDMI, plug in power, and then I'm going to go ahead and switch up to and we can go ahead and continue with our next steps, which in this case means reattaching our crystal line because I disconnected that inadvertently. So what I'll do here is grab my little snips, expose a little bit of wire here, grab my solder, and then I want to just go ahead and reattach that to the pad where it belongs. So it's a little messy perhaps, but in the goal of soldering on with the video, we'll go ahead and take it. So now I am going to go ahead and connect my C pad on the SD tool to the offside of the crystal. If you don't have a quick disconnect, because my current SD tools don't come with one, that's totally fine. You can solder that line directly and then just snip it later when you want to disconnect it or desolder it, however you want to do that. So now what we're going to do is go ahead and apply standby power. So I'm just going to connect power up, but I'm not turning the console on. And we will grab my USB extension here, plug in a SD card reader writer, and make a go of actually reading the NAND on this console. So I'm going to bring up JRunner here. I apologize, the JRunner prompt to run as admin freezes my screen for about 5 or 7 seconds here, so I can't see anything that's going on right now. There we go. Now it's come back. So here is JRunner. Let me go ahead and show it to you guys. So all I'm going to do is physically plug in the SD card into the reader. Again, we have standby power applied. We should see a solid on light indicated here. And then if we go back to JRunner, we can say read NAND. What I do at the prompt here is just say OK. We tell it we know it's a Corona gig. And then what we should see here is a drive letter with some information. And so we don't. That's not ideal, really. It looks like it's trying to do something. It's trying to identify it, and the reader writer is kind of going to town, flashing at this point, which is not something I normally see. So, okay, it did find a couple of physical drive items. So, because we don't see the normal appearance of the size, which I'll show you once we get that, I'm not going to attempt to select either of these and actually read them. I'm going to go ahead and unplug the console, disconnect the SD reader writer, and this is one of the things that I will suggest is have multiple SD card reader writers. I keep a couple of versions around and even an extra spare, and I'm just going to swap that out and give it a shot with a different one. For whatever reason, they can occasionally be a little finicky. And then the Mod Shop actually has a standalone tool that works a little, or works well for reading this if JRunner gives you a hassle here. So now that I've got a different SD card reader writer plugged in, I'm going to reconnect power to the console. I'm going to plug that back in, and then I'm going to go back to JRunner, and see if I hit refresh list, if I get a better response that I'm looking for. So this physical drive 3 is missing the letter here, which is something I would normally expect to see. But I'm going to go ahead and try to read it. Yeah, so we get this failed to get disk geometry. And the fact that I'm getting that across two different SD card reader writers tells me that there's a reasonable suspicion that it may be my soldering or the connection here. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm doing this off camera now. I'm disconnecting the SD reader writer. I'm disconnecting the power I've already pulled here. So I'm going to see if maybe I need to review the soldering and touch anything up here. Alright, so sorry for the shaky cam there. I don't think anything is bridged here, but I'm going to go through and just try to pretty some things up a little bit. Take a little bit of extra time here. So this one, that's not doing what I want it to do at all. There we go. So sometimes with those in ones you can angle them out and kind of win yourself a little bit of distance between the pads. It's hard to tell. Sometimes they can get bridged on just a tiny little microscopic point. So by just giving everything a little touch up and make sure it's all connected where it needs to be and not where it doesn't, hopefully we can resolve this and work through. So this one I'm going over the top. You be careful, it's really easy to accidentally burn a hole through your wires or whatever. This is all fairly precise, but I think that's all reasonable there. So let's give it another shot. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and connect the standby power again, and I should have thrown my little bit of paper underneath it before I did that, but now I've got it in place. Grab my USB extension, we'll throw back on my SD card reader writer, and then we'll plug it in again and give her another shot. So we're getting the solid on light, which is positive. And I need to format it, so that's positive as well. So we'll go ahead and say read NAND again, okay, and then we'll say refresh. Let's see. So this still isn't demonstrating the drive letter to me here. So let's see, do I have Mod Shop's reading tool here somewhere handy? Let me see if I can find that real fast. Sorry guys. Tools. You know, I had it on my desktop here for the longest time, and I must have moved it off, and now I don't seem to have that tool any longer. ModShop, if you get a chance, I know that you had shot me a link to it. I don't know if you've got that posted publicly anywhere. If you want to share it out, that would be cool. I'd be happy to grab it and do that. So what do we need to do here? You know, when I connected and disconnected that C wire, it's possible that the bits of wire that were left over were maybe bridging something. So let's take a look at that, the connections on the chip itself. So I don't see any real obvious sign of bridging. But there is a little bit of schmutz here. Alright, the rest of these all look okay. And these points all seem reasonable. If I still can't get it in the moment, what I'll do is actually just what I always do is remove the entire SD tool and then reinstall it. Like I said, the pads are close together. Sometimes they're a little finicky, so it's not entirely unusual for me to have to do that. I mean, every 3 or 4 consoles I might have to install the SD tool twice. Alright, so we've got that reconnected and standby. Go ahead and hit this and say refresh again. Alright, so we're still not getting a drive letter, which means that we're going to get that failed disk geometry again. I'm going to change out the SD card reader writer one more time here. I'm going to swap it out to one of the little newer ones that I have and give that another shot. So we'll say refresh. And now it's blinking like crazy again. Hey, ModShop posted his tool out on that mega link, so I'm going to snag that while we're waiting to see if this does anything, which I'm quite sure it's not going to. Thank you, kind sir. We definitely appreciate that. Yeah, so we get these entries that say physical drive. They're still not quite right, so grabbing that ModShop tool and see if the standalone reader writer will behave a little better for us. So there is that tool. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to disconnect power. I'm going to go back to that first card reader writer because it didn't at least give me multiple entries in the JRunner aspect. So I'm going to go ahead and plug that in. Well, let me get it halfway. Plug in my standby power first. Plug that in. And then let's go run ModShop's tool. So here's what that looks like. Should just give us a device list, H removable, and let's see if we can read that. We'll just save them off to my desktop. Save. And yeah, we're still getting an argument here, an error. So I'm going to go with my soldering. That sort of thing is not, or is the issue, not the tool or the software that I'm using. So as frustrating as it might be and slightly embarrassing on a live stream, I'm going to go ahead and uninstall and reinstall the tool here. So I'm going to hit everything with a little extra blast of flux, because we definitely don't want to get anything messed up. And we'll just uninstall and then reinstall it once we get it off of here. Double checking the image again. It's possible for it to report and kind of read partially if you've made some sort of mistake, and I'm saying it's possible that I did. So we'll remove all the points and go on about a reinstallation. So I'm going to leave the quick disconnect in place there because I don't really see how that would even potentially be the issue here. So go ahead and straighten these out just a little bit. Make sure everything's good and connected. By pulling on them just a little bit too, I'm ensuring that the connections are nice and solid and that one of them's not like loose and not really making the connection, potentially being my issue. And I'm going to get my reference image back up here. So give me just 1 second while I do that because I had already minimized it. And we're going to go back to the lower left here. So again, we'll start right here. We'll go 2 in the upper left is the first one, and then keep going. You're doing 2 of these consoles. Awesome. Cool, man. Cryptic Gamer. All right. So we're going to go point 2 first, or location 2. And then as indicated in the image, either of the next two pads are actually ground. The first time through this, I'm going to move the camera a little bit out of my way, but hopefully still give you guys a good view. There we go. The first time I used the second pad in order here, and this time I think I'm going to switch up and use the third pad. Again, on the reference image it indicates either of them as ground. So just to see if having that extra space in between leads to less issues. I don't really know any effective difference between the two. I don't think that there is, but we'll do that. Alright, so G for ground, we're going to grab that line and go with that next pad. Alright, and then these ones, again, back to the reference image, the next two down here are 14 and 16, so 14 first. A little bit of fuzz on there. Pull that off. I feel like I'm already being careful, or more careful, because I don't want to have to do this again. Alright, and then 16. Alright, now on to the top row. Give you guys a glance at the reference model, or the reference image again. Lower left. There we go. So now we're going to go 1, 3, skip 3, 11, and 13. The ones highlighted in blue here are unused as indicated. So get back there. We go 1. So here is wire 1. And then 3. So there's some schmutz on there. There's 3. And then, actually, I think I might have just spotted my error. It looks like I didn't actually tin these two pads. I might have been on one pad, two over. Because that should be 11. Right? And that should be 13, I think. Yeah. Yeah. I was a pad over. So I probably didn't actually need to reinstall. I had just installed kind of improperly the first time. I was one pad up further than I needed to be, looking at the residue that's left there. So there's 11, and then my last one is going to be 13. Alright, feeling good about this one. Alright, so let's go ahead and put the console back, get my little bit to stop it from grounding off underneath the SD tool. Go ahead and connect the crystal line that tells it to allow the SD card reader writer to work. I'm going to go ahead and connect standby power, and then bring over my USB extension, grab my USB card reader writer, and let's give it another shot here. So there's my solid on light, which we expect. That's awesome. And we'll go ahead and refresh the drive list in JRunner. Here's what we like to see. The drive letter H, the size all populated. Now when we say read, there we go. We get a nice read, or at least the beginning of one. Now sometimes they'll error out like that part of the way through. Oftentimes what I'll do is just simply exit JRunner, disconnect my standby power from my console, and then restart JRunner and try everything again. I'll do that once here, but this is one of the times where the Mod Shop's 4 gig tool, when it errors out part of the way through like that, oftentimes this tool will work a little better there. So I've got JRunner back up. I'm re-plugging in standby power. I'm re-plugging in the SD tool. And I'm going to go ahead and hit read NAND. Let's just click OK at the blank. Go to Corona 4 gig. We've got our option here. We're going to say read. Tells me the file already exists from the partial read. That's fine. See if it makes it this time. So it made it a little further, but still failed. Or it's going to fail. I can tell when it pauses, because if it's going to work, it usually goes all the way across, straight up. You know, no problem. So, well, it's still hung there. It hasn't failed out yet. There it goes. Now it failed out. So I'm going to go ahead and exit JRunner altogether. I'm going to, again, disconnect power from the console, disconnect the SD card reader, reconnect power, reconnect the SD card reader writer, and then I'm going to see if we can get ModShop's tool to work here a little better. So I'm going to bring up his tool. I'm going to say H. We know that's the drive letter we want. We're going to read. And then I'm going to save that off to my desktop here. And look, oh, 50%. And this one's going to fail out too, it looks like. Okay. So since we're getting a partial read here, rather than continue to do that, one of the other troubleshooting things that you can do with the tool is, like I said before, change out the SD card writer. For some reason, one works when another doesn't, you know, vice versa, back and forth. So I have 3 of them that I rotate between pretty evenly. All right, so disconnect standby power, reconnect standby power, plug in with the new SD card reader writer, and let's see if we have better luck this time. I'll use the ModShop tool again. This time it shows up as a different drive letter because we're using a different device. That's no big deal. Go ahead and save that off to the desktop. And look at that, read success. We're going to read it a second time. Read success, that's great. And then usually, even when I use this to read, I still use JRunner to write the ECC file. So I'm going to go ahead and close that and fire up JRunner while I disconnect the power and disconnect the SD card reader writer. I'm not going to write the ECC at this point because I'm going to suggest that people first starting out probably need to do it this same way so that they are sure that they don't damage the console with the installation of the chip. So basically, once we install the glitch, we can still test boot the console after it's been had the chip installed to make sure before we write anything to the NAND that our install hasn't, you know, buggered anything up. So all I've done is take the ACE-V3 out of the package, use the little sticky pad, attach that to the back, and we'll go ahead and place it onto the console. Position for that I use is right about there, just above the SD card connections and accessible to the other header that we're going to connect it up to. I'm showing you guys the intro video. I did skip over that, so I should totally do that. I've got JRunner fired up. I'm going to hit my desktop and grab those 2 NAND files that we dumped using the other tool, and we'll just say NAND compare. And we get the nice message that we expect and hope to see. NANDs are the same. So great tip, ModShop. Thank you for calling me out on that one. I definitely should have done that in the first place. So you're dead on that for sure. All right, so now that we've got our chip placed, we've got our original NANDs read, we can be a little bit more confident going at this console doing what we want to do, and know that we're going to meet with success. So the points that we're going to solder to now are actually in that header that is covered in flux. And we're going to do the first point being 5-volt power, which is this little guy off on the end on his own. So there's that one. The next point is the top leftmost point, which is actually a ground. Now, you may notice that I'm having to hold heat on that for longer. That's totally normal. The ground plane serves to kind of dissipate the heat, so you oftentimes have to hold a little heat extra long on that one particular point. Totally normal. Don't be alarmed there. And then finally, the next point that we'll do is, or the points that we'll do are the E and F points, which if you just come right over from ground here to the two top and bottom. So there's E and there is F. And those are going to be the points that we connect to here. There are a couple of points here that we would use if this was a 16 megabyte console. We would be soldering the blue and green wires there. But since this is a 4 gigabyte NAND console, we won't be using those. And then while I'm here with a bit of solder, I'm just going to go ahead and pre-tin the pads that we're going to be connecting to, just so that those are ready to accept the wires as we get there. Alright, so the ACE wires actually come with what I consider significantly too long of ends on them. So you can see how long that's extending out now. What I'm going to do is just use my little snips, and don't do this over your console normally because you could lose the little wire bit. But I'm just going to shorten that up so that what you actually see is just a tiny bit. Let's see if I can get it to focus. Yeah. Man, come on, focus. There we go. Almost. There we go. So you just see a tiny bit of metal sticking out of the end there. You can catch the glint in the camera. You know, in any case, the idea is that when we go to actually install, what I'll do is I'll heat the little blob of solder, the pre-tin bit, and then that little bitty bit on the end there will just kind of get shoved into the molten solder and will form the connection. The pads are already, or the wire leads are already pre-tinned. They're just too long. And then on the end that goes into the chip, you can see how long that wire is, but it really doesn't matter on this side because the pads are much further apart, and it, you know, the exposed wire length doesn't really hurt anything there. So again, that point to 5 volt, and there's our first connection to the glitch chip. And I'm going to go ahead and trim these other wires real fast. I'm not going to bother to try to capture it on camera because, let's face it, I could barely get it to focus on there for demonstration. So Cryptic Gamer says he installed one of the ACE-V3 last night. The E-pad actually disconnected from the board, but you're able to get solder pad built, and it won't know if it works till you get the new SD tool in the mail. Okay. Cool. Mod Shop's giving some good advice. All right. So the next one I'm going to do is going to be the connection here, as I mentioned before, that top point being the ground G&D connection that will go to the chip. So we're just remelting that solder, inserting our little end in it, and then run that over to ground. You have alternate E and F points right below. Oh yeah. Alright, and then E and F, just to point out what ModShop just commented about, you have alternate pads. So these row of resistors, the two R2C7, R2C6 that are there, those are the path that is flowing up to the E and F points. So if you did damage these beyond belief, you could actually use the R2C6 and R2C7 location to pull from there. But those are going to be even more fragile than here, so take caution. If you've already damaged the larger pad, the chances are that you would damage, the smaller, more fragile pads too. So just be careful. All right, so top point is E. Think of it alphabetically. E comes before F. E is on top of F, that sort of thing. And then the bottom point is obviously F. How do you clean the flux off? I just use some isopropyl alcohol on a little cotton cleaning pad. Comes right off. All right, so there's E and F. So those are the top side points that we're going to use. The final 2 points that we're going to connect are going to be what's left over, obviously, C and D. D is always going to be consistent. So if you're watching this and you did have the R2, C6, and 7 in place, the C point will be the same as what I'm doing here. If those R2, C6, and 7 were not in place and you need a postfix adapter, your C point will be different than what I'm about to demonstrate. But in both cases, the D point, the RST point, will be the same. So D, I route through the hole right here near the south bridge, and we flip the console over. The location is kind of hard to point out, but there's a little horseshoe of connectors here, and what you see is this very top little point right there. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 up. Right there is going to be where we connect the D point to. There are alternate D points if that one scares you, but this one does boot the best, to be honest. So no problem. We'll go ahead and throw just a tiny little bit of flux right there on it, just to be diligent and make sure that we don't hose anything up. And we'll go ahead and pre-tin the pad just a little bit, so just get a little bit of solder on it. And then this is again where having the wire trimmed back to only having a tiny bit exposed really is beneficial for you. So there you go, connected to that top point. Now that point is relatively fragile, so what I like to do is fire up the hot glue gun and then back away from the point, back over in this area. I'll put just a line of hot glue across it so that if anybody ever tugs on that point, that it won't rip the pad straight off. It will have a little bit of reinforcement. And then the C point will actually be the same point that we use on like Trinities. So it's this post row, and the way I think about it is over 1, up 1, over 1. So it's this point right here that we're going to be connecting to. Yeah, I totally agree with what Mod Shop's throwing out there. For a newbie, for a first timer, for somebody who does not have practical soldering experience, SMD soldering experience specifically, stay away from 4 gig NAND consoles. They're just going to be a little bit more than you really want to bite into as a first timer. So you can go ahead and stick with a 16 megabyte console. The cool thing is that you can pretty much 100% identify what are 4 gig NAND Coronas versus 16 meg NAND Coronas by the manufacture date. So if you do the July of 2011 and later are going to be Coronas. So then if you just power it up, if you see an onboard 4 gig in a July of 2011 or later console, that's just about 100% guaranteed to be a 4 gig NAND Corona. If you have a July of 2011 and later console, that's going to be a Corona, but when you power it up, you do not see the 4 gig onboard module, then you know you've got a 16 megabyte NAND Corona, which is what you would want as like a first timer. All right, so now my hot glue is warmed up a little bit. I'm going to apply a little bit to both of these, as I said, just to keep the fragility of the points protected. So just a little row of hot glue so that if they ever get tugged on, the points don't rip out. All right. So now my C point, I'm going to come up through the other hole here, and then this one actually kind of gets connected in reverse order because now I'm connecting it to the chip after having already connected it to the console. So this one is going over to C. And there it is. So now we have technically installed our glitch chip. We've read our NAND, but we've not written anything to the NAND. So the NAND is still in a retail state. So what should happen now with the crystal line disconnected, we don't have that connected, with our SD tool protected from bridging out onto anything here, we should be able to plug in power and HDMI and still boot retail. What you probably will notice is that the glitch chip will still flash, but we should still be able to successfully boot into normal retail OS, or whatever you want to call that. Alright. ModShop, the XEX menu 1.2 is really bloated. I think it has a bunch of skins built into it, so it's like 200 and something megabytes on its own. An Aurora install is something like 50 or 60, and a FSD install is like 75. So you probably need closer to 300 or 400 if you wanted all of that pre-installed. So just to throw it out there. So what we're going to go ahead and do is, I guess I'll power up the console first for you. So I just turned it on using my my infrared remote here. We see the glitch chip is flashing, and it's going on a continuous pulse, which isn't the end of the world. So it'll flash here for a second, and then we should still get a boot, and then a stock dashboard here. So we'll give it a few seconds while it takes care of that. Sometimes on the very first boot, these or the first attempt at a boot, they don't like to go. If it doesn't catch on here in a second, I'll just disconnect power, reconnect power, and boot it again. Yeah, 2.5 gigabytes is more than enough to install everything to feed. So 2 Coronas, you're modding the first 2 consoles you've ever modded, but you're very expensive soldering and you build complete Raspis. I'm not sure those two things are exactly equivalent. The Raspberry Pi is a pin header setup. It doesn't really require soldering, but if you're comfortable, go for it, man. Alright, so I'm going to try it again. Just power it on after a quick power disconnect, reconnect. Oh, we got a red dot. Huh, with the, you know what? I'm misremembering. ModShop, correct me. I think what I'm trying to do is use the feature of the 15432 timing files. When you program the ACE with the 15432 timing files, they will allow retail bypass to still boot. But I don't think that's true of the stock default timing file on the ACE v3 for the Coronas. Can you confirm? I don't know. I'd be curious to know what your opinion or thought is on that. In either case, I'm going to actually, because I think I know better, I'm pretty confident in that answer actually. So I was mistaken when I said you should still be able to boot retail here. Yeah, so ModShop agrees. So if I was using a different timing file, if I was doing the CR4 speedup method using the timing files from 15432, the chip would allow retail to boot through anyway. But because I'm using the default ACE v3 timing file, the one that's programmed in here for Coronas, it does not have that feature. So it does cause the console to not be able to boot. If I wanted to super confirm that nothing else that I've done This is what you could do is I'm just going to remove the power from the glitch chip. So I just disconnected the line for 5 volt. And when I do this now, then it should boot. So without the glitch chip running at all of the rest of the wires are still connected. There we go. And we are getting a successful boot here. I apologize for the bad information there. Razzie Bros, you're trying to buy an Ace V3? You can find those over at store.weekendmodder.com in the Xbox Tools section. I also have Rev Cs, Runs, Matrix V1s. Got quite a few things to offer you there. So there we got successful boot. And we got the Viper chip too, which is I just re-upped on those from Mod Shop, so I got a good quantity. The 2-pack on the Viper chips is an awesome deal, guys. For 15 bucks, no, 15 bucks a chip. So for 30 bucks, you get 2 dual NAND chips. That's cheaper than a single one of the Demons ever was. A dual NAND Slim E. The Viper is for sale over there too. So yeah, I'm telling you about both of them. Or you can buy 1 for 20 or 2 for 30. So I think the 2 for 30 is clearly a better deal. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and reconnect our power to our glitch chip. So I'm reconnecting the 5 volt line. And now it's time to go ahead and write our ECC file. So what I need to do is pull over my USB with my SD card reader writer again. I need to plug in the C crystal line to the side of the crystal here that engages the SD tool. We'll go ahead and connect standby power. We'll plug in the SD card reader writer and not get a solid light on, so that makes me unhappy. Disconnect power. This reader writer sometimes just disconnects within Windows, so you just plug it back in. There we go. So standby power, SD tool into the card reader. There we go. So when we hit JRunner here, I've got glitch 2 selected. I'm going to say create ECC. I'm going to say write ECC. I'm going to select my card and I'm going to write the ECC. Tells me I'm about to say yes. And we got done message, so we know we successfully wrote the ECC. It happens super duper fast. So now I'm going to disconnect standby power, disconnect the SD tool, disconnect the crystal bridge, and go ahead and plug in standby power, HDMI, and Ethernet, because I'm going to pull my CPU key in via Ethernet instead of having to type it. So I'm going to use my handy dandy infrared remote, fire it up, and I should see pulsing, and hopefully we'll get a good boot here in a few moments. Trap mods. No, this is not for sale for $19. This is $19 in supplies in order to mod one of these consoles. So it's the combination of the glitch chip and the SD tool, which are the only two specific tools that you need in order to RGH a 4 gig Corona. So there we go. We got a successful boot here just after a couple of cycles. And you can see we've got Zell on screen. And once we get down to the CPU key here, it'll also populate the IP address because I've got Ethernet plugged in, so 1.23. So if I come down to my JRunner, I've got this pre-set up. I just enter my .23. If you don't have this sort of thing configured, you can always just manually hand type in the CPU key. But I just suck it in over the Ethernet, and it pops in there. So now I've got my CPU key. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the console. And back in JRunner, I'll click Create XE Build. Remember, I've got Glitch 2 selected here, and it's going to build a NAND for me. The dual NAND chip for the 16 megabyte Slim E. There is, all right, Razzie Bros, The chip that you would use would be a Viper, and you would need a thing called a Corona QSB adapter. That adapter would let the Viper work on a Corona console. Otherwise, you would have to direct wire it. I don't have the adapters. Nobody makes them still, so you'd have to find one somewhere magically. I don't know. Do you need an SD card reader to read a 16 gigabyte Corona? There's no such thing as a 16 gigabyte Corona, a 16 megabyte Corona, and the answer, as Modchop said, is no. All right. Anyway, so the next step is to go ahead and write the XE build NAND to the console. So I need to show you guys that I am reconnecting the crystal line to the quick disconnect here. I'm removing my Ethernet cable. HDMI doesn't need to be plugged in either. I'm just going to go with standby power. And then I will connect the SD card writer. And then back in JRunner, all we should have to do is write NAND, select, and write. And then say yes. And we're writing the UPD flash.bin to the console. And based on the flashing that you can't see here, it looks like it didn't want to do that for me. There we go, cancel. I'm going to try write one more time. Okay, so being used by another process. I just crashed JRunner. I'm going to switch out my SD card reader writer. I'm going to close JRunner. I'm going to reopen JRunner. And we're going to load up this console. So in the output folder, 462.305, that's this one. So here's the updflash.bin file that we've created. I'm going to go ahead and reconnect standby power to the console, plug in my SD card reader writer. I'm going to say write NAND, and we're going to write yes. Here we go. So we're getting progress. Finished! Hooray! Alright, so now disconnecting standby power, unplugging the SD card reader writer, and then also disconnecting the crystal standby. And this boot should be to what looks like regular or stock dashboard when we boot it, but is in fact an XE build version. Modchop, would the Corona QSB adapters that they made for the Demon not potentially do that? I will find a wire. What's it called? Okay. I can't handle this dude anymore. You're going in timeout. Razzie, bro, I don't mean to be mean to you, but you're walking in circles and proving that you don't have a basic understanding of what you're even trying to accomplish, and I just can't handle that in the chat right now. So, all right, so we've got we've got power connected, we've got HDMI connected, we've got the crystal line disconnected. We're going to go ahead and power it up, and what we should see is a successful boot here, pretty quick like. So there's 2 cycles. So I think we're at like 5 or 6 cycles. There we go, successful boot. And if we go to the Xbox screen here, what I'll do, just to prove to you guys that this is in fact now an RGH console, I'm going to sync up a controller here. And then this is the first boot. If you've ever bought a brand spanking new Xbox 360, this is the thing that runs the very first time you power it on. That happens when you build a new NAND in JRunner most of the time. It kind of resets that flag. So we've built into or booted into stock dashboard here, and I have got a USB that's got the avatar update as well as XEX menu and some other stuff loaded on it. So I'll go ahead and plug that in, and it's gonna force me to probably do the avatar update first before I can demonstrate the XEX menu running on the console. So we'll give it a few seconds while it reads and syncs up here, and we probably will see a prompt on screen. There it is. Do I want to do the update? Yes. I know that this is safe because all I have on there is the current dash avatar update. So while that's rolling, let's look at the chat here. So there's an issue you haven't had time to test. Okay, that's good to know that the QSB adapter is not tested working. You were doing an RGH Trinity with the Ace V3 when you tried to boot, but you had a red dot. Man, that's so generic that it would really just be guessing. Have I heard of FX menu? I have not. King Versace, can I mod your console? Absolutely. Sendin.weekendmodder.com. So the avatar update just finished and it's rebooting now. You can see that in the upper left that one sticks on, and that's totally normal. It'll disappear and then do exactly that once it's successfully rebooted. Modshop, check out this. Oh, what is that? Oh! Dude, I need to show this on screen. You got some X and A's. Lower left. That's badass. So these are like XDKs, XNAs for development purposes and stuff. That looks really cool. I don't know what I would ever possibly use one for personally, but the debug stuff is pretty neat. So we've successfully booted here and we've got the screen back. You can tell that the avatar update installed successfully because my characters have, like their visible little avatar dudes. And then what we can do now that we're logged in is I can go into the games menu and you can see XEX menu, which is reading off of my USB there. And I can fire that up, which point in case proves that this is in fact now an RGH. The fact that it can run XEX menu. A retail console cannot do that. We've got Aurora Dash right here. We could scroll down and launch and I could run Aurora Dash. I could copy things over to the internal memory or to a hard drive. But this console is now an RGH. We have successfully RGH this console. So I got time for a couple of quick questions and then I have to run. So just recap real fast what this would do at this, or what I would continue to do at this point is entirely remove the SD tool, remove the crystal line, and then if this was like a send-in service, I would do the custom LEDs in the front, and then once the hard drive was back inserted, I would copy like Freestyle Dash, XEX menu, that sort of stuff from my USB onto the customer's hard drive so that they would have all that sort of stuff. So I'm going to run through the last couple of questions here and then bail, so get ready. Do you still sell a good bit of consoles ever since Next Gen has pretty much taken over? I have backed off from selling pre-modded consoles because of the expense of stocking them, mostly focusing on send-in services now. For just 75 bucks, you can send me your console. I'll send it back to you modded. That includes the return shipping costs. That includes my time. That includes, all of that sort of stuff. So 75 bucks flat rate. What are the things taking the hard drive slot on the 5 consoles you posted? Those are the sidecars for the XNAs or XDKs. They're for emulation and development for game developers, basically. How much does it cost to go online with the RGH? There are stealth services that range from free to like 20 bucks a day and everywhere in between. XTX Legends, you are very welcome. 10 a day, 30 a week, that sort of thing. Yeah, it's not totally out there. There are free ones though, or at least were if you're out there. So anyway, guys, thank you very much. I wanted to demonstrate that, again, if you wanted to purchase this, the Ace V3 and the SD tool could be grabbed off of my website. I actually have a shopping cart set up here just to demonstrate. You can pick these both up at my store.weekendmodder.com. An Ace V3 chip and an SD tool all in, you would be looking at $19.93 shipped to your door anywhere in the U.S. Only a couple of bucks more if you're international, something like $6 or $7. We'll get it to Ireland, Australia, anywhere else in the UK, South Africa, a bunch of different places. But for like 19 bucks, I have built an RGH, assuming you have basic soldering tools. You might need to add $2 or $3 to that if your version needs a postfix adapter, but it's totally possible. Alternatively, like I said, you can always hit up my RGH send-in service, where for 75 bucks, I will do it for you and ship it back to you. So thanks again for hanging out, Mod Shop. I really appreciate you helping out and joining in the moderation. Shout out to Mod Shop. It's modshop.co if you're interested in any of his services. He's the guy who designed the SD tool that we used here. I've just become kind of a distributor for it. So anyway, thanks guys very much. We appreciate you, and until the next time, see you later.